For some reason, the first thing that went through my mind when I looked at these patch notes was an Old Spice commercial. Look at beauty. Now look at me. Now look at beauty. Now look at me. I'm Bad Sushi, and I'm on a horse. Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts. Another news flash because we have big news in the world of Phobies. That is, of course, patch 1.5.1. Now, there's a whole lot to break down in this patch, and we're going to go through each of the elements. Now, before we jump into it, I do have to, of course, let you know that I am part of the Phobies content affiliate team. That means that the Phobies team gives me stuff for producing Phobies content. Of course, I want to let you know at the start what the story is. But enough of that. Let's get into it. As mentioned, there's a whole lot of things to cover. We have balance changes. We have new jacks showing up. We have audio changes. We have localization changes. There's an enormous number of things that are happening in this patch. We're going to start with some of the more technical things and then put the balance stuff at the back end. If you want to jump around, feel free to use the sections below. Of course, while you're down there, hit up the links in the description. Likes and subscribes do help. You can come by the live stream, hit up the Random's Thoughts Discord, all that good stuff. First thing we're going to talk about is the sound. Why is that? If you look down below me right now, you can see Lippy. But guess what? We're not hearing Lippy. Why is that? Well, the Phobies team decided to add, and in their own words, by popular demand, players can now adjust the volume of Lippy's voice independent of special effects and music. Find the voice volume slider in the options menu. Now, this isn't quite what I was looking for. Honestly, I don't mind Lippy, although I've complained about Lippy on many an occasion. I was hoping more for a regularity, how frequently Lippy's going to show up, but this absolutely works because I don't mind Lippy showing up and talking to me sometimes. But sometimes I would just rather he shut up. It's the way it goes. But I'm absolutely happy that we are at least getting the choice. We have the option to choose whether we want to listen to Lippy or we don't, and it's not going to really impact gameplay. Shout out to the team. Yes, definitely like this. The next change we have is actually related to challenges. There are a number of small, irksome things that still remain in the client, and this was one of them, so the team went ahead and corrected it. That is, there wasn't a next button when you were completing challenges. Now, once you complete a challenge, you can immediately jump into the next brain buster as soon as you finish it. This is actually really cool, and I hope that this shows up in other places, namely async. I would love to be able to just hit next and instead of getting kicked back to the main menu, so that way I can just keep going down my list and keep playing. So hopefully there are going to be other corrections, updates, changes to the rest of the UI, so shout out to the team for this one. There's been new localization added to the game, specifically Brazilian Portuguese. Now this is added to the game for in-game text, and you can switch to it from the options menu. However, notably, the audio is still in English. Now I'm using the English client, specifically the Steam client, so I can't really show anybody, but it is cool that we're getting more localization. It's definitely a challenge when building games, designing games. I've heard it from a number of developers over the years for a variety of different games, that it is very challenging to get these things done. So shout out to the team for continuing to push on this front. What got added? Well, there's a few different things that might be interesting to those mobile players. So in this case, there are new rewarded videos. A video ad jack has been added to the jack screen. These jacks will appear after a player has opened their timed free jack. Players will have the option to watch an ad in order to open this jack and receive additional rewards. This optional jack will be available until a player's next free jack appears. Secondly, there's an offer wall. Again, both of these are only for the mobile clients as dictated in the patch notes. An offer wall is available via the coffee section of the in-game store. Players can complete objectives in other games and apps to earn coffee for use in Phobies. Select free coffee to explore and participate in offers. Now, I am not personally a fan of things being offered in other games to then bring to Phobies, but people have asked on many occasions, will there be a collaboration? Will there be other ways for people to bring things in from other games to Phobies? And I guess this is a step in that direction. Additionally, it's just another way for players to, well, be in Phobies more because you're getting coffee to spend on things or you're having jacks to open. In both cases, it's more stuff for the player base, and it's been an oft repeated refrain that, especially from me, the criticism I have frequently leveled at Phobies is that The game is very punishing. There aren't a lot of ways to continually increase your collection, to acquire new phobies, get those levels, whatever it happens to be. These will assist in that. It won't necessarily help bridge the gap between players that don't have and players that do have, because if both of them are doing it at the same rate, guess what? That gap is going to continue. However, at least it's another way for people to try and catch up. It also draws in more people on the mobile platform. So I'm fairly positive about this, although there are potential implications here that could get messy down the line. We'll see how it goes. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Have you had this in other mobile games? Are you excited about this? Let me know down in the comments about this or any of the other things that are showing up in this patch. Now, there were, of course, a number of other odd and end changes that were made to the client and to other parts of Phobies. So we had some bug fixes with accounts. There were some general bug fixes. There were some localization issues. There were updates to Boomer's card text, some stability changes, and, of course, there's a thank you from the team. We have to get all that stuff out of the way before we get into the part that I'm sure everybody is very excited about, and that is, of course, the balance changes. In fact, let's talk about them right now. Now, there were, in fact, 5 total balance changes, and we're going to go through each of them, and like I said, I'm going to give you my thoughts on them and what we can glean from this, because there's information here that you can kind of read between the lines, not just from the balance changes themselves. The team states this: in the interest of providing a better gameplay experience and ensuring competitive matches, players will see some slight changes to a number of phobies in the near future. The following phobies will be affected: Beauty, Russell, Smiley, Bad Sushi, and Charon. First up on our Balance Pass tour for patch 1.5.1 is Charon. Now, we'll talk about other options later, but this phobia in particular is getting a buff to its stats, which is important because ultimately Charon's damage was very low. Right now, if you compare level 1 to level 1, which is how you should always be evaluating phobies, it now is getting pretty close to Ginsting. And Ginsting shows up a lot, right? Problem is there's a few different factors that go into it, but it is notable that Charon is moving up the damage ladder. However, Charon, I think, ultimately is still going to fall prey to the fact that it costs 1 more than Ginsting, and its ability is where a lot of its economy, a lot of its budget is sunk. Most of Charon's cost should be focused on the fact that it disables tiles, and as a result, you can't buff it that much because you need it to shine in the specific niche scenario that it's used for. Otherwise, you end up with this problematic scenario of, okay, Charon's just better than the other 5 costs. If they were to say buff it to 400, 500, 600 damage. That obviously didn't happen, and the team is being cautious about that. Ultimately, could Charon use a buff? Yes. Could it use a further buff? Yeah, probably. But I would rather see personally that it gets balanced by introducing maps that leverage Charon's specific unique ability as compared to just simply buffing the numbers. Now, we'll come back to simply buffing the numbers at the end when I give my overall thoughts, but keep that in mind as we go through, that there are hypothetically other ways to balance all the phobies without necessarily touching any numbers. Now, we're going to jump around a little bit because I don't want to just go in sequence, partially to build up the drama a little bit, but also because I'm excited to talk about some of these other changes. So we're going to talk about Smiley. Now, Smiley has actually gotten beat up a lot on my stream, and I recall specifically not that long ago that I actually said, when was the last time we saw Smiley win? And as a result, I guess the devs maybe heard me, or they were all along the same wavelength. Smiley here is getting a 200 HP buff. This is pretty significant. Will your phobie tank an extra hit, take 1 less hit to eliminate the opposing phobie, or able to do something that it couldn't do previously? That's why it's easier to talk about it when you look at everything at level 1. So where was Smiley before? Well, it was in the range of Akira, Blinky, Gargles, Grimes, Moly Bully, Puff, Pterodactyl, Octonauty. The phobies that are living in the 1800 range are Blulian, Chuck, Clopster, Doom, Erratic, Foul, Rocket Man, Slammerhead, Unbearable, Venus, Woolly Bully, and Yeti. Oh, by the way, one more, Zappy. Does this make a significant difference? Well, 200 health is a lot. This could be an extra hit that your Smiley is tanking, which for something like Smiley is enormous. The whole point is that you need to use the Smiley to either zone your opponent or tank all those hits and then get up on there and get that stinky breath all over everything. But Smiley does now have a better chance. And clearly the devs felt that the win rate for Smiley was too low. I actually like this buff. Smiley has the potential to be kind of toxic. We'll see how this one shapes up. After our Smiley guy, we have what went from an absolute meme to an absolute terror, at least on my stream. Which, by the way, you can check out some live Phobies action at RTChompGG over on Twitch, link in the description. Russell has been another Phobie that has just caught an enormous amount of flack. And I've given Russell an enormous amount of flack. But truthfully, pre-buff, I have gotten a huge amount of value out of Russell. I don't know that this buff changes much. Here's why. Russell is similar to other Phobies like Charon that we've talked about, is tied up and pretty much solely concerned with its ability. You're paying 8 keys for the Caw. You're not paying 8 keys for the AoE attack. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying strip the AoE attack off. I'm not saying take it away. At the end of the day, if you wanted an AoE Phobie like that, there are other options. You could probably put the keys to better use. It's just a nice to have. However, Russell is getting multiple buffs. It's not just getting a health buff going from 1400 to 1600 health. It's also going from 450 attack to 500 attack, which 500 is a big number when you're talking level 1. There aren't too many Phobies that actually beat that number. As you get higher up, closer to the 8 keys, yes, that number goes up. The quantity of Phobies goes up. So it's getting this more in line with what it should probably be doing. This means that those attacks will hurt even more, and he can actually tank maybe another hit. As we said, an extra 200 health could be a big difference depending on levels in actually getting to connect with the Phobies that are clustered. The main reason that I'm playing Russell is to activate the Caw. There are absolutely games that I will win with Russell now that I would have lost with Russell before because of these numbers changes, but at the end of the day, Russell is not a stat stick. It's not just there for the numbers. It's there because of the button that I click. And that's where we're going to have to talk about other stuff once we get through the other changes. So we have our first nerf of this patch, first and only nerf of this patch, and that is Beauty. Beauty actually got a nerf last time around. If you recall way back when, this was Newsflash number 3. That's some time ago when you think about it. Back in July, Beauty originally, when the game first launched, was 2200 health. Beauty then got knocked down to 2k, and it's getting knocked down again, down to 1800. That is a huge drop-off from where it originally stood. It's also, not only that, instead of just a health debuff, a health nerf, like we saw originally in patch 1.4.1, we're now getting an attack nerf, 450 to 425. That's a lot going on with Beauty. Is this actually the death knell for Beauty? Well, to be perfectly honest, I've seen way less Beauties since the previous nerf to this one. Now, I've seen probably the same, if not more, number of comments complaining about Beauty, but I have to wonder, was Beauty a terror at specific ranks, specific skill levels? Was there something going on there? Or was it simply that Beauty really was problematic? Ultimately, and I'm playing in Sum of All Fears, I haven't seen that much. In games that I review, because if you've watched previous streams, if you've watched my other videos, I do a ton of game reviews. You don't see Beauty all that much. And it makes you wonder, is there a reason for that? Now, ultimately, the team has decided to tag Beauty. There are two ways to look at this. One, they could have looked at the numbers and said, yes, this is a problem. It is still out of line from a win rate perspective, a utility perspective. It's not fitting what we want it to do. Two, you could look at it as throwing a bone to the community, and that ultimately, if there is enough chatter, enough noise, enough wailing and complaining that Beauty is problematic, does the team need to actually do something about it? And it's entirely possible that either or both of those particular statements are true. And I hope the team does elaborate on this further. But at this time, as I said a moment ago, is this the death knell for Beauty? Maybe. I mean, I don't think it's impossible. As I said, I was seeing very little Beauty prior to this. This makes Beauty much more manageable and truthfully makes sense. It's a 2-move Phobie. It's ranged. It has an AoE attack. It also has an activated ability, and realistically, its damage output was fairly high. There will be games that you are going to lose your beauty more easily. There are games that you're not going to be able to finish something off with a beauty that you could have before, except the laser beam. I think this is worthwhile. Although I personally felt that beauty wasn't too much of an issue, I think beauty does provide a very explicit and extreme example of I'm doing too much. So I think that this is valuable. Thumbs up for the team. Even if it was simply to allay the fears of the community, I think this is one that is warranted as opposed to what we'll call caving to people complaining. There's always the risk of that if you're changing things just because people don't like it, that where does that stop? In this particular case, I think that ultimately beauty justified it. Now, our last balance change is a bit of a meme, and may continue to be a meme, truthfully, but we'll have to see. Because the numbers on this being Bad Sushi, went from 1400 health to 1600 health. This is a pretty tanky phobie. But realistically, how many people have played a Bad Sushi actually got it to connect? Now, of you people that have raised your hands, first of all, put your hands down. Why did you do that? Second of all, did you win the game? Did the Bad Sushi make a difference, or would you have won with any other phobie anyway? Or would you have been better off if you just kept the keys? I do have some hope for Bad Sushi. Because it's poison and not disease, the fact of the matter is that it is curable. Therefore, while it does represent a huge threat, there are answers to it. And I think ultimately, changing this stat on Bad Sushi is not really going to affect it too much. It's possible that now it's a terror because it can tank so many hits, it always is connecting with your team. It could hypothetically dominate early games on small maps. Right now, I doubt that's going to happen because it's one move. You can kind of just walk away from it. There are a slew of mechanicals. The areas where it's going to be a problem are at low ranks and low stress levels, low collection levels. Players that don't have the skills to deal with it, on top of not having the collections to deal with it. So you can't beat it from either side. It may be a problem there, but most people graduate out of both of those scenarios, or at least one of them, fairly quickly. So shout out to the team. I do like that Bad Sushi is getting help, but let's get into the other thoughts about this patch and what we can get from between the lines. So here's the part that I kept alluding to that I was dancing around and didn't actually describe. At the end of the day, phobies aren't just their stat block. They aren't simply the numbers next to their health, their movement, their range, their damage. That is a big component, don't get me wrong, but they are not simply that. Ultimately, we have a bunch of phobies that have a whole bunch of other abilities. Ultimately, we have a whole bunch of phobies that are attached at the hip, or whatever part of the phobia they're attached to their abilities. And those abilities are what you're paying for, whether it's Russell, it's Charon, it's beauty, it's whatever. Most of the cost, most of the budget, I'm calling it, is tied up in those abilities. Yes, there are phobies at low key costs that are ultimately just stat sticks, but for the most part, phobies are the combination of all of those factors. You aren't simply just dumping it out there because it has 2 move and it does 500 damage. You're putting it out there because it has flying, because it has a laser beam attack, because it heals, because it pushes, because it pulls, because it's a lob, because it powers down, because it powers up, because it does this, because it does that. It could even be a boat. There's a lot of things that phobies do. And at the end of the day, here's the thing that's notable about the 2 balance patches that we've had. We did not get a change to Beauty's movement. We did not get a change to Beauty's range. We did not get a change to the AoE on the attack. We did not get a change to laser beam. And similarly, we didn't get a change to the Caw. We didn't get a change to halitosis. We didn't get a change to Bad Sushi's explosion. And we didn't get a change to No Fair. So it's interesting that the team is electing to not make these changes. Now, it could be a technical limitation. I played other games where it's simply not feasible for the devs necessarily to change that sort of thing on a given card. Instead, they'll adjust the numbers and it takes a much greater effort in order to basically do a rework, a rebuild, a rewrite, or if you play card games for a long time, an errata on a card. Now, it's also notable that it's only certain stats. They've yet to touch things such as movement. Now, I'm not saying that it should either for the last balance patch or for this one, but it's notable that hasn't happened. It's something to consider that the team is electing to do A and not B. Why is that? We don't know, and I hope that the team elaborates on why some of these changes are coming down in the fashion that they do. All the phobies can very much be balanced, can very much be nerfed or buffed simply through different usage of maps. It could be obstacles, it could be abyss tiles, it could be lava tiles, hence Charon, it could be a brand new tile. There are a whole lot of ways and unique map layouts that will increase or decrease the value of a given phobie. You could even make small maps, small as in the geography, with big map key limits, or big maps with small key limits, or play around with the amount of keys that are provided to you each turn, like a small map with a small amount of keys, but you get 5 keys a turn. Or a big map with a big amount of keys, but you only get 3 a turn, and see what that does. That's absolutely going to change the outcome of games, change the play patterns, and force players to do something different, which has been another common refrain, topic for another video, of people feeling that things are stale. So I guess overall for the balance patch, will this actually impact the meta? Well, we're going to have one other thing to add on to this as an independent segment before I close up the balance piece, and that is changes that I think should have been made. What changes should have been made in this balance patch? Well, the two at the top of my list, really 3, 2.5, we'll say, are Attractor and then Stabby and Bowmangles. I think these are the ones that are the biggest issues for most players. They are the ones that cause an enormous amount of complaints on my stream, in my Discord. I've seen it in the main Discord. I've seen it in other places. And realistically, these phobies are not going away. Nothing in this patch really changes it. Talking about Stabby and Bowmangles, they both need to be addressed because it's primarily Stabby, but Bowmangles is also up there as an early game turret. Small maps tend to be dominated by these phobies. These phobies create specifically difficult scenarios for people at low collection levels and the staleness that people keep mentioning at higher collection levels and higher skill levels. Can they be beaten? Absolutely. And here's the thing, despite my complaining about this, the team must feel one of 2 ways. I guess there's more, but the 2 ways that come to mind are this. 1, this is how they want the game to play. They want things at those or under those specific conditions to play out in this way, where you have your turrets, they control the game, and then you build up your game plan from there. Whether that means you bank into a high key, you try and go multiple mediums to flush their turret out, put pressure on them, whatever it happens to be. 2, and this doesn't preclude the first point, but maybe they just aren't performing that well. Realistically, if Stabbies and Bowmangles are showing up in every single game, or virtually every game, they're going to push themselves inherently towards a 50-50 win rate. Is that okay? I guess if you look at the macro, the 10,000 foot view, and say, yeah, they're a 50-50, so that means it must be okay. You can't quite go by the numbers that hard and fast. So it's possible that these phobies are fine, but I think that they should have been on this list to get looked at. Let's talk about Attractor. Attractor, I think, is the biggest problem in the game. I think Attractor dominates every game that it's on the board. And again, this phobia is not unbeatable, but the scenarios and the stalemates that it creates make it extremely difficult to fight. It can come out fairly early. You don't have to bank that hard. Presents a number of scenarios due to it being 3 range, not just on its attack, but also on its ability. It's an AoE ability. The ability comes back very quickly. Another place that things could be balanced. Changing the cooldowns. It presents so many problems on so many maps. Basically every map. I don't know that there's a single map that exists where Attractor is bad. And it creates a scenario where either your opponent is trying to play backwards, in which case you can roll your team forward into an advantageous position, backing them into a corner, or they have to dive to try and get the Attractor, ultimately causing the Attractor's ability to happen anyway. Again, not unbeatable. Absolutely, I've beaten Attractors. Absolutely, we've seen plenty of games submitted for breakdowns where people have had Attractors and lost. They've played Attractors and won. Opponents had Attractors and lost, etc. However, I think that the game states that are produced by Attractor ultimately are problematic. But again, the team elected to not change these phobies, so I have to wonder, is this simply a matter of scope, a matter of scale? I don't see as many games as the devs do. They have way more stats than I do, and probably broken down in way more detail than I could dream of. That means that they know better than I do. Plus, it's their game. It's how they want it to play out. Maybe they're perfectly fine with the way a tractor plays. And I think everybody needs to keep that in mind when they're evaluating these changes as they're playing games. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to feel that the devs should be doing something differently. But keep in mind that they have their own thoughts too, and each individual person is not the specific target for the game. If you're not happy with it, that is your right, and that is okay. And that's kind of what it comes down to. Overall, I am happy with this set of balance changes. One thing that would have been cool to find out in the patch notes is how often are we going to get these patch notes? That's something that hasn't really come up. Hopefully we will get a regular cadence of these. Of course, if there's something super egregious, whether it's a balance change, a bug, or whatever, the devs are going to step in. They have in the past. But I'm very curious, are we going to get a balance pass every time that there's a new update? That would be pretty cool. And I think it's warranted because, hey, these new things are coming in. We need to adjust. That's perfectly acceptable. But should we be getting them more frequently? What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Because this is one of those things that there is a risk. There's a risk, and I've already seen people that said, hey, now my beauty sucks. I mean, will it? That's up for debate. But the immediate reaction for people who aren't as invested in Phobies, and this is something to keep in mind, maybe I logged in and all my cards are changed. Do I even want to play anymore? And this is something that is well documented through a number of other games and a number of other developers that have said the same. You do run the risk of alienating some of your players whenever you do these sort of things. So do you think Phobies should get more balance passes? Should they have done anything different in this one? I'm kind of two minds. I already said my piece about what they could do for the balance passes, but I think a regular cadence, whether it's 3 times a year, 4 times a year, every time that there's a major patch, whatever it happens to be, give us a balance pass, even if it's nothing, and just say, hey, we're comfortable with where things are. Check back in with you in a few months. I think when people come to expect that, yes, something is going to happen, or this is the date when something is going to happen, if it's going to happen, again, barring that there's something super egregious, I think that that is feasible, and I think that's reasonable. So, like I said, let me know. What do you think? Now, as to the patch as a whole, I think this was a pretty solid patch. We got a number of things that people have been clamoring for, whether it's on the balance end, it's on the UI end, it's on, well, the audio end. There's a variety of different things that I think help out. So thumbs up to the team. Great job. I hope to see more of these in the future. And of course, you're going to see more Phobies from me in the future. That's going to do it for this one, though. If you have any comments, questions, or otherwise, feel free to hit up the links in the description, my Discord, the live stream, or just click on that comment section, hopefully with a like and subscribe to go with it as well. That's going to do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.